The wind outside the great hall was strong and very cold. It hit the walls of ice and made a loud howling sound. Inside the hall, it was warm because of the fire pits. Many tall beings stood around the room. They were the Xylari. They had skin that looked like blue stone. They did not wear heavy clothes because the cold did not hurt them. They were strong and tall. In the corner of the room stood a man named Dan Brooks. He was from Earth. He looked very different from the others. He wore a thick gray suit to keep warm. His skin was soft and pink. He did not have claws or thick muscles. To the Xylari, he looked very weak. Princess Lyra stood next to Dan. She was the daughter of the Empire leader. She was beautiful and very strong. She could lift heavy rocks with one hand. She looked down at Dan. She felt shame. She did not want her people to see her with a human. The marriage was for peace between the stars. It was a political deal. But Lyra wanted a husband who could fight. She wanted someone who could survive the ice without help. Dan was an engineer. He fixed machines. He did not hunt beasts. Lyra leaned close to him. Her voice was low and sharp. "Why do you stand so close to me?" Lyra asked. She looked straight ahead. She did not want to look at him. "You look like a child who is lost. You are shaking." Dan was not shaking. He was standing very still. He looked at his hands. They were gloved. He spoke in a calm voice. "I am standing where protocol says I should stand," Dan said. "I am your spouse. I should be by your side." Lyra let out a short breath. She was annoyed. "Protocol does not matter if you look weak," she said. "They are watching us. They are laughing." Across the room, a group of warriors talked loudly. They held cups of hot drink. One warrior named Kale pointed at Dan. He laughed so hard his shoulders moved. "Look at the human," Kale said. "He wraps himself in cloth like a baby. If the wind blows hard, he will break." The other warriors laughed too. They showed their arms. Their muscles were hard like rock. "My grandmother is stronger than him," another warrior said. "Why did the princess choose him? Is there no strong male on his world?" They did not know that Earth was different. They did not know humans survived by thinking, not just by being tough. They thought strength was only about bones and skin. Dan heard them. He did not get angry. He did not shout. He just checked the metal box on the table next to him. It was a small case made of steel. It had locks on the side. Lyra saw him touch the box. She frowned. "What is that?" she asked. "Is it medicine? Do you need pills to stay warm?" Her voice was mean. She wanted to hurt his feelings. She wanted him to leave. Dan looked at her. His eyes were kind. "It is not medicine," Dan said. "It is for work." Lyra rolled her eyes. "Work," she repeated. "You think this is a job site. This is a banquet. You should put it away. You look like a servant carrying tools." The room was full of noise. People ate meat and talked about hunting. They talked about the big beasts that lived in the snow. They said humans would die in 1 minute outside. Dan listened to all of it. He knew what they thought. They thought he was fragile. They thought he was useless. But Dan knew something they did not. He knew that being strong was not just about muscles. It was about being ready. He put his hand on the lock of his box. He felt the cold metal under his glove. He was not afraid of the warriors. He was not afraid of the cold. He had spent years fixing things in hard places. He knew how to solve problems. Lyra turned away from him. She walked toward her friends. She did not invite Dan to come with her. She left him standing alone by the wall. The warriors watched her go. Then they looked back at Dan. They smiled with sharp teeth. They wanted to see him fail. They wanted to see him run away when the real test came. Dan did not move. He stood like a statue. He watched the door. He knew the ceremony would start soon. They would go out into the storm. They would hunt the Froststalker. The Xylari thought it was a game of strength. Dan knew it was a game of survival. And humans were very good at surviving. He patted the box one more time. He was ready. The cold wind howled outside, but Dan did not mind. He waited for the moment to show them what a human could do. A loud horn sounded through the great hall. It was deep and shook the ice walls. The banquet was over. The time for the hunt had arrived. The warriors stood up quickly. They grabbed their weapons from the racks. These weapons were long spears that glowed with blue light. They were plasma lances. They used intense heat to kill prey. The light hummed with energy. Dan picked up his steel box. It was heavy and made of thick metal. He lifted it with both hands. His muscles strained under the weight. Lyra looked at the box. Then she looked at the glowing spears. She shook her head. She felt embarrassed again. She wanted to tell him to leave it behind. But the warriors were already moving toward the door. They walked out of the hall and into the night. The cold air hit them like a solid wall. The wind was strong and bit at any exposed skin. The warriors did not flinch. They walked with their heads high. Their blue skin glowed slightly in the dark. Dan zipped his suit up higher. He pulled his hood over his head. The wind was strong. Snow flew in the air. It was hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Cale walked in front of the group. He was the leader of the guard. He was the biggest of them all. He looked back at Dan. His eyes were cold and hard. "You should stay here," Cale said. His voice was loud over the wind. "We have a safe zone nearby. It has energy shields. You can watch from there. It is safe for soft things." Dan kept walking. His boots were crunching on the ice. He did not stop. "I cannot do that," Dan said. His voice was steady. "The rules say the spouse must be present. It is tradition. If I hide, it is an insult to your people." Lyra stopped walking. She turned to face him. Her face was hard like stone. "Tradition is for strong people," she said. "You will only slow us down. If the beast comes, you will be dead. You will be a burden to us. We will have to protect you." Dan looked at her. He did not look scared. He looked tired but focused. "I will be fine," Dan said. "Just let me do my job. I know what I am doing." Lyra wanted to argue more. But the other warriors were waiting. They were watching her. She sighed. She turned around. "Fine," she said. "But do not expect help. If you fall, we will not stop." They began to walk again. They moved away from the city lights. The warm glow of the buildings faded behind them. Now there was only white snow and a dark sky. The cold was extreme. It was colder than any winter on Earth. Dan checked his suit sensors. The temperature was dropping fast. His suit hummed quietly. It kept him warm with internal heaters. The Xylari did not need suits. Their bodies made their own heat. They walked for an hour. The snow got deeper. It reached their knees. Dan trudged through it. Each step was hard work. The steel box was heavy. It banged against his leg with every step. Cale looked at the box again. He laughed. The sound was sharp in the cold air. "What is in there?" Cale asked. "Is it food? Do you need snacks for the walk? Maybe you need a blanket." Dan did not answer. He kept his eyes on the ground. He was looking for tracks in the snow. He knew what signs to look for. The aliens looked for blood. Dan looked for pressure marks. They reached a wide open area. It was a valley between two hills of ice. The wind was quieter here. The snow settled on the ground. Cale raised his hand. "Stop," he said. "We are close. The beast lives in this valley." He looked at Dan. "This is your last chance. Go back to the shield line." Dan shook his head. "No," Dan said. "I stay." Cale shrugged. He did not care. He thought Dan was foolish. He thought the human would run when the fighting started. The warriors spread out. They held their plasma lances ready. The blue light glowed in the dark. It looked very hot against the ice. Dan put his box down on the snow. He opened the locks. They clicked loudly. He did not take out a spear. He took out a hose connected to the tank. It looked like a tool for fixing pipes. It was thick and black. Lyra saw the hose. She felt angry. She walked over to him. "You bring a garden hose to a hunt," she said. Her voice was full of disbelief. "This is not a joke, Dan. That thing cannot kill a frost stalker. You are making us look bad." Dan checked the pressure gauge on the tank. The needle was in the green zone. The system was ready. "It is not for killing," Dan said. "It is for stopping." Lyra did not understand. She thought he was confused. She turned away. She did not want to watch him fail. She focused on the dark shadows ahead. She waited for the beast to appear. Dan stood behind her. He held the nozzle tight. He was calm. He knew what was coming. The snow began to swirl. Something big was moving in the dark. The ground shook slightly. Dan tightened his grip on the handle. He was ready. The others ready their heat. Dan ready his cold. The silence was heavy. Everyone waited for the first sound of the monster. The snow in front of them began to move. It was not the wind moving it this time. Something huge was underneath the white surface. The ground shook with a heavy rhythm. Boom, boom, boom. The warriors tightened their grip on their plasma lances. The blue light hummed louder. Dan stood still behind them. He held the black hose with both hands. He checked the gauge again. The pressure was steady. He waited. Suddenly, the snow exploded upward. A massive shape rose into the air. It was the frost stalker. It was bigger than a truck. Its fur was white and thick like wool. Sharp icicles hung from its back like spikes. Its eyes were red and glowing. It opened its mouth and let out a roar. The sound was so loud it hurt their ears. Snow fell from the sky because of the noise. Kale shouted orders to his team. "Attack," he yelled. "Fire at the head." The warriors moved forward. They pointed their glowing spears at the beast. Beams of hot blue energy shot out. They hit the beast in the chest and neck. Steam rose into the air where the beams touched the fur. The aliens cheered. They thought they had hurt it. But the beast did not stop. It did not even flinch. The heat from the plasma melted the ice on its fur. But the cold air froze it again almost instantly. The beast was made for this weather. Heat did not work well here. The energy dispersed into the cold wind. The beast shook its body. The ice shards on its back clattered together. It looked at the warriors. It was not hurt. It was angry. The beast lowered its head. It dug its claws into the ground. Ice flew everywhere. Then it charged. It moved faster than something so big should move. It was like a white tornado coming toward them. Kale yelled for them to hold the line. But the warriors were scared. They had never seen a stalker this big. The beast hit the front line. It used its shoulder to smash into the warriors. 2 of them flew into the snow. Their plasma lances skittered away across the ice. The formation broke. Everyone started to move in different directions. They tried to surround the beast, but it was too fast. It turned and snapped its jaws. It missed a warrior by inches. The wind howled louder. The storm was getting worse. Lyra saw her people falling. She felt shame and anger. She was the princess. She had to protect them. She gripped her lance tightly. She ran toward the beast. She wanted to draw its attention. "Come here," she shouted. She waved her arms. The beast heard her. It turned away from the fallen warriors. It looked at Lyra. It saw her as the biggest threat. It charged at her. Lyra planted her feet. She waited for the right moment. She thrust her lance forward. The blue tip touched the beast's nose. There was a bright flash of light. But the beast kept coming. The force of the charge hit her shield. It was too strong. Lyra was knocked off her feet. She slid backward across the ice. Her lance flew out of her hand. It landed far away in the snow. She lay on her back. The cold snow was against her suit. She looked up. The beast was towering over her. It raised a massive claw. The shadow covered her completely. She could see the sharp teeth in its open mouth. She tried to move, but her leg was twisted. She could not get up. The warriors were too far away. Kale was helping the others. No one could reach her in time. Lyra closed her eyes. She thought this was the end. She thought about her people. She thought about her failure. She had mocked Dan for being weak. Now she was the one on the ground. She was the one who could not fight. She felt tears in her eyes. She waited for the bite. But the bite did not come. She heard a strange sound. It was a hissing noise, like air escaping a tire. But louder. It sounded like a storm in a bottle. She opened her eyes. Dan was not running away. He was not hiding behind the others. He was walking toward the beast. He walked right between the beast and the princess. He held the black hose up. The nozzle was pointed at the monster's face. The beast looked at Dan. It seemed confused. Why was this small soft thing not running? The beast roared at Dan. It wanted to scare him. Dan did not move. He did not shake. He looked very calm. He adjusted his grip on the hose. Lyra watched him. She wanted to scream at him to run. She wanted to tell him he would die. But no sound came out. She was too shocked. The warriors stopped fighting. They watched the human. They thought he was crazy. They thought he was saying goodbye. Kale shouted at him. "Move, human. You will be killed." Dan did not listen. He stood his ground. His boots were planted firm in the snow. The beast lowered its head to snap at him. It was only a few feet away. The heat from its breath fogged the air. Dan spoke quietly. He did not shout. He just talked to himself. "Ready," he said. He pressed the trigger on the hose. A white cloud shot out. It was not fire. It was not energy. It was vapor. Thick and heavy. It hit the beast in the face. The temperature around them dropped instantly. The air felt colder than before. Much colder. Dan held the hose steady. He did not waver. The beast opened its mouth to roar again. But the white cloud went inside. The beast stopped moving. Its eyes went wide. It tried to lift its claw. But it was too slow. The cold was faster. The white vapor hit the beast like a solid wall. It was not just mist. It was liquid cold. The moment it touched the fur, the moisture in the air turned to ice. The sound changed from a roar to a crackling noise. It sounded like breaking glass. The beast tried to swipe its claw at Dan. But the joint stopped moving. The ice formed over the muscles. It locked the bones in place. The red eyes of the monster widened. They were not full of anger anymore. They were full of confusion. The creature did not understand what was happening. It had never felt cold like this. It lived in the ice, but this was different. This was the cold of space. This was the cold that humans mastered. Dan held the nozzle steady. He did not stop spraying. He moved the stream up and down. He covered the head and the chest. The white layer grew thicker every second. It looked like armor made of frost. The beast was still moving forward because of its own speed. But its legs were stiff. It could not run. It could not jump. It was just a heavy object sliding on the snow. The warriors watched with their mouths open. They had never seen anything like this. Their plasma lances were still humming in their hands. But they did not fire. They forgot to fire. They were too surprised. Kale stood frozen in place. He forgot to breathe for a moment. He thought the human would be crushed. Instead, the human was stopping the monster. Lyra was still on the ground. She watched from below. She saw the ice creeping down the beast's neck. She saw Dan standing tall. He looked small compared to the monster. But he looked powerful. He was not shaking anymore. He was in control. The beast let out one last sound. It was not a roar. It was a groan of stress. The ice was too heavy. The cold was too deep. Its heart could not pump blood through the frozen veins. The massive body slowed down. It stumbled. The front legs locked straight. They could not bend to catch the weight. The beast tipped forward. It fell toward Dan. Dan stepped to the side. He moved calmly. He did not panic. The beast crashed into the snow. It did not make a soft sound. It made a hard thud, like a tree falling in winter. The impact shook the ground. Snow flew up into the air. But the beast did not bounce. It did not bleed. It lay still. The ice on its body cracked from the impact. A piece of frozen fur broke off and shattered on the ground. It sounded like pottery breaking. The monster was not just dead. It was frozen solid. It was like a statue made of white stone. Dan lifted his finger off the trigger. The hissing sound stopped. The white vapor faded away. The silence returned to the valley. It was louder than the roar had been. No one moved. No one spoke. The wind blew softly around them. Dan checked the gauge on his tank. It was half empty. He nodded to himself. It was enough. He closed the valve on the tank. He secured the hose. Then he looked up. He looked at the warriors. They were staring at him. Their weapons were low. They did not look angry anymore. They looked scared. Not of the beast, but of him. They thought he was weak. Now they knew he was dangerous. Lyra pushed herself up. Her leg hurt, but she forgot the pain. She stood up slowly. She walked toward the frozen beast. She reached out her hand. She touched the ice on the creature's side. It was hard as rock. It was cold enough to burn her skin. She pulled her hand back quickly. She turned to look at Dan. Her eyes were wide. She did not know what to say. She had called him weak. She had called him soft. But he had done what 10 warriors could not do. He had stopped the unstoppable. Kale walked forward. He stepped over the snow. He stood next to the frozen head of the beast. He looked at the ice. He tried to scratch it with his claw. The claw made a white mark, but did not break the surface. "It is hard," Kale said. His voice was quiet. "It is harder than stone." He looked at Dan. "How did you do this?" Dan picked up his tank. It was heavy again. He slung it over his shoulder. "I told you," Dan said. "It is for stopping. Heat makes things move. Cold makes things stop." The warriors gathered around. They did not cheer yet. They were still processing what happened. They looked at their plasma lances. Then they looked at Dan's tank. They realized their weapons were not the only way. They realized there was another kind of power. They had always thought fire was the strongest force. They thought melting the enemy was the only victory. But Dan showed them that freezing was stronger. The beast was not burned. It was preserved in ice. It was a monument to human skill. Lyra walked up to Dan. She stood close to him. She did not look down on him anymore. She looked him in the eye. "You saved me," she said. Her voice was soft. "You could have run. You could have hidden." Dan shrugged. He adjusted his gloves. "I told you I would be fine," he said. "I know my job." Lyra looked at the frozen beast again. She felt shame. But she also felt pride. Her husband was not a weakling. He was a master of his craft. The wind blew harder. The storm was coming back. But they did not feel afraid. The beast was dead. The human had won. And the aliens knew things had changed. They would not mock him again. They stood in the shadow of the ice statue. They waited for Dan to speak. They were ready to listen. The cold did not bother them, but the respect they felt was warm. They understood now. Strength was not just about muscles. It was about knowing how to survive. Dan stood quietly. He did not boast. He did not demand praise. He just waited. The silence stretched on. It was a comfortable silence. The hunt was over. The lesson was learned. The human was not a pet. He was a partner. And the Xylari would never forget this day. They looked at the ice. They looked at the man. They knew their world was different now. Kale looked at the frozen beast one last time. He reached out and tapped the ice with his claw. It made a ringing sound like metal. He turned to look at Dan. The big warrior lowered his head. This was a sign of respect among his people. "You have great power," Kale said. His voice was rough but honest. "We thought fire was the only way. We were wrong." Dan shook his head. He did not want to be seen as a god. He just wanted to go home. "It is not power," Dan said. "It is just science. We study the cold on Earth. We learn how to use it. Kale did not understand science, but he understood results. He signaled to two other warriors. They broke off a large piece of the frozen claw. It was heavy and white. They carried it between them. This will be a trophy, Kale said. It will show our children what happened here. They began the long walk back to the city. The wind was still blowing hard. The snow covered their tracks as they walked. But the mood was different now. Before, the warriors walked in front. They left Dan behind. Now, they walked beside him. They made space for him in the line. They did not laugh at his suit. They looked at it with curiosity. They wanted to know how it worked. Lyra walked close to Dan. She did not walk ahead this time. She matched his pace. Her legs still hurt from the fall. Dan noticed this. He slowed down slightly so she did not have to struggle. She saw him do it. She felt a warmth in her chest. It was not from the fire pits. It was from kindness. I was wrong, Lyra said. She spoke softly so only he could hear. Dan looked at her. About what? About you, she said. I thought you were weak. I thought you needed protection. I judged you by my body. I should have judged you by your mind. Dan smiled. It was a small smile. Everyone has different skills, he said. You are strong. You can lift heavy things. I am smart. I can build things. Together we are better. Lyra nodded. She felt shame for her earlier words. But she also felt hope. Their marriage could work. They could be a team. They reached the city gates. The guards opened the heavy doors. They saw the warriors returning. They saw the ice claw. They saw the human walking tall. News had spread fast. A runner had gone ahead to tell the city. The people who stayed behind came out to see. They lined the streets. They watched the group approach. When Dan walked past, the people did not laugh. They were quiet. They touched their chests. This was their way of saying thank you. Dan did not expect this. He stopped walking. He looked uncomfortable. You do not need to do this, Dan said. Kale stepped forward. He stood tall. We bow to strength, Kale said. You showed strength today. You saved the princess. You saved the hunt. You are one of us now. Dan nodded. He did not know what to say, so he just kept walking. They entered the great hall. The fire pits were still burning bright. The room was full of people. They were waiting for news. When Dan walked in, the room went silent. Then someone started to clap. Then another person joined. Soon the whole room was making noise. It was not mockery. It was honor. Lyra took Dan's hand. She held it up for all to see. Her voice was loud and clear. This is my husband, she said. The room quieted down to listen. He saved my life. He saved our warriors. He is strong. The crowd cheered louder. The sound bounced off the ice walls. Dan felt his face get hot. He was not used to attention. He just wanted to fix machines. But he knew this was important. The Alliance needed this. The Xylari needed to know humans were not pets. They were partners. They were equals. The cheering lasted for a long time. Then the people began to eat and drink again. But the mood was happy. The fear was gone. Later, the crowd left. Only Dan and Lyra remained in the hall. They stood by the fire. The heat felt good. Lyra looked at the metal box. It sat on the table. Will you use that again? She asked. Only if needed, Dan said. I hope not, Lyra said. But I am glad you had it. She looked into his eyes. I promise something. I will not judge you by my standards again. I will learn your standards. Dan smiled. He took off his gloves. His hands were warm. That is all I ask, he said. The next day, the news went to the stars. Ships carried the story to other planets. Other aliens heard about the human who froze the beast. They stopped thinking humans were weak. They started trading more with Earth. They wanted the cold technology. They wanted to learn from human engineers. Dan went back to his work. He fixed machines in the workshop. He did not seek fame. He did not want to be a warrior. But when he walked in the hall, warriors made way for him. They touched their chests in respect. Lyra walked with him always. She was proud. The cold wind still blew outside the city. It was harsh and dangerous. But inside the empire, things were warmer. The human had found his place. He was not just a husband. He was a hero. And the Xylari learned a big lesson. Strength comes in many forms. Muscles are good. But a smart mind is better. Dan sat at his table. He opened his tools. He had work to do. The galaxy was big. There were many problems to fix. He was ready. The ice beast was gone. But the memory stayed. It was a symbol of human ingenuity. The alliance was secure. The princess and the engineer stood together. They looked out at the snow. They were not afraid. They knew they could handle whatever